It was 06:42 when the light slipped through the slats of the blind, slicing faint patterns across the hardwood floor. Elena Harper stood still in the narrow living room of a second-story apartment tucked above a pawn shop in a quiet corner of Charlottesville. She hadn't touched the coffee on the windowsill, and the dust on its rim suggested she hadn't touched it yesterday either. Her hand hovered just over an old photograph resting on a folded flight jacket, the name tag long removed. The picture was faded, colors softened by time, the corners curled from too many thumbprints. 4 people stood in front of a T6 Texan II, their faces mostly clear except one her own, partially obscured by a water stain that had bled from the edge inward. She didn't smile at it, didn't frown either, just stared like someone staring at a horizon they hadn't seen in years. Her thumb brushed the image once, slow and precise, the way someone might wipe the fog off glass. The photo didn't go back in the drawer so much as disappear into it, tucked away under a stack of envelopes she'd never opened and wasn't planning to. Elena moved like she had all day to move. She slipped on a white button-up shirt with one frayed collar point and pulled her hair back with a tie that barely held. She didn't check the mirror. There was no mirror. Her jeans were clean, her sneakers less so. The rubber soles cracked just enough to catch on the edge of the carpet if she dragged her heel. There was a rhythm to the way she moved through the apartment, keys in the right pocket, wallet in the left, knife clipped inside her waistband but hidden beneath the hem. Not paranoid, not anxious, just a rhythm, like habits from an old job she couldn't name out loud. The kitchen counter held nothing but a tin of instant coffee and a single-key black plastic head, the kind used on armory locks. She picked it up, then put it down. Wrong time. Wrong life. Outside. The street stretched empty, warm already. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed to life. She closed the door behind her with no sound at all. Not careful. Just practiced. Like everything she did. It looked effortless because it had been rehearsed 1,000 times when no one was watching. Her walk was even. No limp. No sway. But there was a stiffness in her shoulders, like someone who'd sat through long hours in jump seats and cockpits. She passed a man in a baseball cap who looked up and nodded. She nodded back without changing stride. The mailbox by the front gate rattled in the breeze, even though there was no wind. At 07:12, she crossed Main and kept going. No phone in her hand. No earbuds. Her gaze stayed level, scanning but not obvious, as if the world had taught her to look without staring. Cars passed, tires hissing on the asphalt. She didn't look up, didn't need to. The town had changed since she'd last let herself walk this far without purpose. New signs, new faces. But the air smelled the same. Summer dust, hot brick, a trace of diesel and cut grass. If she closed her eyes, she could almost believe she was walking across the tarmac again, boots on sun-baked concrete, heading toward pre-flight on the line. Almost. She turned onto a side street lined with small shops. A barber pole spun outside a window. The smell of fried dough drifted from a diner's vent. A cat watched her from the roof of a parked car, its tail flicking once before settling again. She paused for a moment at the corner, one hand resting on the edge of a street sign like she was calibrating wind speed. She wasn't going anywhere urgent, not officially. But her pace had purpose. The kind that comes when the body remembers something the mind's trying hard to forget. Something with checklists, with tower clearance, with the sound of canopy locks clicking shut, and the rumble of turboprop startup cycling in your chest like a second heartbeat. She hadn't touched a flight stick in years, not since the day they pulled her clearance and made her choose between truth and silence. She chose silence and stayed gone. But this morning, for reasons she hadn't tried to name, She'd opened that drawer and looked at that photo again. She'd seen the familiar flight line, the uniforms, the way her own posture leaned slightly forward, arms crossed in a way that said she hadn't smiled much back then either. And for a moment, just a breath long, she had missed it. Not the mission, not the politics, just the feel of control, of knowing exactly where you were in space. She took one last look at the town behind her, then pushed the shop door open. The bell overhead chimed. Once. Sharp. Too bright for the quiet morning. And just like that, she was in. It was 11:48 when Elena pushed open the door to Ashwood Firearms, the bell overhead giving off a brittle, mechanical ring that snapped too loudly in the dry summer air. Heat clung to her skin, crawling in through the seams of her shirt and settling behind her neck. The AC inside buzzed faintly, but it didn't cool the place much. The air had the smell of oil, metal, and coffee that had been burned down to tar. A few men leaned on the front counter, chatting with the clerk while a woman browsed through a rack of concealed carry holsters. A girl in her teens flipped lazily through a handgun magazine, her braces glinting when she whispered something to the boy next to her. His backwards cap was turned so tight it looked molded to his head. None of them noticed Elena at first. Then someone did. The first laugh came quick. Not loud, but cutting. One of the men near the Glock display elbowed his friend and nodded toward her. She was a stranger, dressed like she'd walked out of a thrift store sale bin. Worn sneakers, faded jeans, white button-up with a collar frayed just enough to suggest she hadn't replaced it in years. Canvas wallet pressed under one arm, like she didn't trust the place enough to pocket it. Another laugh joined the first, louder this time. One of the young men tilted his head back like he was setting up for a punchline. His gold chain caught the overhead lights. "You planning to pick up a Glock to saute some zucchini or just scare off squirrels?" The guy behind the counter, name tag crooked on his vest, chuckled but didn't say much. His name was Marty, wiry build, buzz cut, long-time employee, probably the type who could field strip a .45 but had never actually been shot at. He eyed Elena with the same kind of look he might give a busted floorboard harmless but out of place. Elena didn't react. Her eyes moved across the rows of pistols on the wall. She stopped on the Glock 19 Gen 5. Black polymer frame, front serrations, consistent, familiar. The third guy, tight polo shirt, aviator shades clipped to his collar, leaned forward on the counter. "Don't hurt yourself, lady. You even know how to clear the chamber before you try showing off." Marty smirked like it was a good one. He picked up a demo model and waved it. "This one's for folks who know what ends which. Might be a little advanced for tourists." The woman near the holsters glanced up, eyebrows raised. The man in camo pants by the ammo case snorted, then went back to comparing grain weights. The girl near the magazine pulled out her phone, elbowed her friend, and angled the camera up just enough to start recording. Elena's hand hovered over the counter. She didn't reach for anything yet. Her eyes moved across the displays again, not rushed, not unsure, just scanning. The first guy spoke again, this time louder. He looked back at his friends like they were a laugh track waiting for a cue. Glock 19's got a hell of a recoil for someone wearing secondhand sneakers. Maybe try something small caliber. You know, like a squirt gun. The boy next to the braces girl snorted. He was already halfway through typing a caption for the video. Something like, "Lady thinks she's Jason Bourne." Elena stepped closer. Her fingers brushed the edge of the glass case. But she didn't touch anything yet. The store didn't go silent. Not all at once. But the chatter started to die. The weight of her presence shifted something, barely enough to notice, like the way wind changes before a storm. Marty tapped the side of the case. You sure you're in the right place? Bakery's next door. She didn't look at him. Her gaze rested again on the Glock 19. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. I'd like to see this one. The gold chain guy raised his eyebrows and took a half step back, as if suddenly unsure what game they were playing. His friend whispered something that sounded like, "You gotta be kidding me," but no one laughed now. Marty lifted the Glock from the display with exaggerated slowness and set it on the counter. Be my guest. Don't point it at your face. Elena didn't smile. She didn't blink. She reached forward, picked up the weapon, and held it for half a second like she was measuring something. Her thumb checked the slide. Her index finger ran along the frame, never near the trigger. The silence deepened, but it didn't settle. It buzzed. Even the air felt tighter. She placed the Glock back on the counter without a word. Her eyes didn't leave it. Her hand rested beside it, fingers open, relaxed. The braces girl had stopped recording, but her friend hadn't. The phone was still up, though he had pulled back slightly like something had shifted in the room he couldn't quite name. Outside, the sun beat down on the sidewalk. Inside, the air conditioning kicked louder, but no one seemed to notice. Marty crossed his arms. All right. Show us what you got. Tourist. Elena didn't answer. Not yet. But the room already felt smaller, and no one was laughing anymore. At 11:52, Elena reached out again, her fingers wrapping around the Glock 19 with the ease of someone who didn't need to think. She didn't adjust her stance. She didn't look around. She just lifted the pistol and in one motion thumbed the slide back to confirm it was clear. The click was clean. Her left hand shifted, pulling the takedown lever with exact pressure. Then the slide came off. The barrel followed. Then the recoil spring. 4 seconds. Maybe less. Each movement crisp and frictionless, like she was peeling an orange in a single coil. No one breathed. The metal parts rested on the counter in a neat line, not a single piece out of place. Her hand hovered over them a moment longer, her index finger gently tapping the edge of the barrel once. The sound was soft but sharp, a rhythm, like punctuation. The boy with the backwards cap lowered his phone just slightly, his thumb frozen above the screen. The teenage girl blinked twice, unsure whether to keep filming or not. Her voice barely carried. She did that faster than my cousin loads his BB gun. The guy in the tight polo took a step back, his smirk draining. Marty's jaw worked side to side, like he wanted to say something but couldn't decide how stupid it would sound. An older man near the end of the counter, gray stubble and a weathered army baseball cap pulled low, leaned toward the customer next to him. His voice was quiet but carried. That's special ops level. That's not something you learn in a gun safety course. Elena said nothing. She began reassembling the Glock with the same effortless flow, starting with the barrel, then spring, then slide, guiding it back into place with a gentle snap. It locked with the same sound it made in armories across the country. Her fingers moved with a fluidity that came from years of repetition, but not one move was rushed. She wasn't showing off. She was just doing what she knew. The way some people tie shoes without thinking. When it was whole again, she tapped the top of the slide twice. The room stayed quiet, like something sacred had just happened. She stepped back half a pace, rested her hands on the counter, and looked down at the weapon. No smirk, no nod, no hint of pride. Just completion. Claire, the woman in the blazer, didn't speak. Her arms were still crossed, but her jaw had tightened. She looked like someone trying to justify a bad bet. The girl with the braces held her phone against her chest now, no longer recording. Her friend stood beside her, mouth half open, like he had just watched a magician and couldn't find the wires. Nobody said anything for a few long seconds. Then, Elena spoke, her voice flat, barrels still off-center. And with that, she tapped the counter once more and waited. The Glock sat silent. The store did too. The silence had stretched thin when the click of heels cut across it, sharp and deliberate. A woman in a navy blue blazer, makeup flawless, hair drawn into a tight bun, stepped forward from the aisle near the ammunition display. Her voice carried like someone used to being heard in boardrooms, not ranges. "This is ridiculous," she said, eyes narrowing. "You're wasting everyone's time with this little act." She waved a manicured hand at Elena's shirt, at the frayed collar and dusty sneakers. "If you were the real thing, you wouldn't need a scene. So, what is this cosplay?" She let the word hang, smug and dismissive. Elena didn't turn to face her. She didn't flinch. Her fingers reached for the cleaning kit sitting just beside the register. She opened it without a sound, pulled out a cloth, and began wiping the Glock slide with slow, measured strokes. Each movement was precise. Thumb, cloth, metal. She cleaned without urgency, without looking up. The woman crossed her arms. I asked a question. Still, Elena said nothing. The cloth swept over the barrel again. She focused on the task like the rest of the world had fallen away. Her expression didn't shift. Her breathing stayed even. After the third pass over the slide, she finally spoke. "I'm not here to perform." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The way she said them made the air shift. The woman faltered. Her weight moved from one foot to the other, her lips pressed into a thin line. Marty cleared his throat from behind the counter. His voice picked up now, louder, like he wanted control of the moment again. "Neat trick," he said. "But field stripping a Glock doesn't mean you can shoot." He jerked his thumb toward the steel door that led to the indoor range. "We've got a target and a lane. Let's see if your hands are as fast on the trigger as they are on the bench." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. A couple of the guys near the ammo wall chuckled. The tension had cracked just slightly, giving them permission to laugh again. But not everyone did. The older man in the ball cap stayed quiet, watching Elena like he knew a little more than he should. The girl with the braces stared, barely blinking. Her friend had stopped pretending to film. Elena finished wiping the slide and set the cloth down. She aligned the pistol on the counter again, perfectly square. Her hand paused over it for a second, then fell away. She didn't glance at Marty, didn't say yes or no. She just looked toward the range door, like she already knew what came next. No pride, no swagger, just purpose. And for the first time since she'd walked in, a few people shifted not because they were mocking her, but because they were unsure what she might do. It was 12:04 when Elena's eyes slid across the wall behind the counter and landed on an old Colt Python 357 Magnum. The finish was dulled with time, its grip worn down to a smooth curve. She pointed at it, calm and clear. That one. Marty blinked. The laughter from Trevor and his friends came before he could say anything. The guy in the polo leaned against the counter again, grinning like he'd been handed the punchline of the day. Going old school. "What? The automatic's too much for you." Another voice chimed in from the back. One of the regulars in a camo vest. "She probably won't even hit the paper." Marty pulled the revolver from the case and handed it over, still smirking. "Be careful with that, ma'am. It's got kick, not made for finesse." Elena took the Colt, tested its weight in her hand without a word, then turned and walked toward the range door. Her steps were steady. The crowd followed, buzzing with murmurs and grins. A few pulled out phones again. One whispered, $10 says she flinches before the second shot." Inside the range, the air was different, heavier. The smell of powder and metal clung to the walls. Acoustic foam swallowed every echo. The firing lane was worn, but clean. She stepped to the booth and loaded 5 rounds, her thumb pressing each 357 cartridge into the cylinder with a quiet finality. Behind her, they gathered like spectators, arms crossed, phones held low, voices hushed now. Someone muttered, "This is going to be good." She took one slow breath, squared her stance, and raised the revolver. The silhouette target was 50 feet out, standard black on white, center mass marked by concentric rings. The paper was already scarred by past attempts, holes scattered wide. Elena didn't adjust again. She didn't shift or fidget or flex her grip. Her breathing slowed to a rhythm. In, out, in, hold. The first shot cracked the silence, sharp and clean. The recoil rolled up her arm, but she didn't flinch. She absorbed it like she'd done it 1,000 times. The Colt dipped, reset, and steadied. Second shot. The sound bounced once before the foam killed it. She blinked once. Nothing more. Third shot. The target didn't move. Her stance didn't waver. Fourth. One breath. One squeeze. No hesitation. No ceremony. Fifth. The hammer fell. The cylinder clicked, and the last round roared through the air. Then it was still. No one spoke. No one moved. A few phones stayed up, but none of them were recording anymore. The motor at the ceiling whirred as the target reeled in. Slow, mechanical, relentless. When it stopped in front of the glass, every person leaned forward. 5 holes, all inside the center ring. Not just close, touching. So tightly grouped, they formed a single ragged opening no larger than a quarter. The paper around it was shredded slightly. The edges curled like it had been punched clean by one jagged fist. Marty's pen slipped from behind his ear and hit the floor with a plastic clatter. No one picked it up. Claire's mouth opened, then closed again. Her magazine forgotten. Arms dropped to her sides. Trevor stepped back. The gold chain he wore caught the overhead light. But his posture didn't carry the same shine. Elena lowered the Colt, checked the cylinder with a flick of her thumb, and began unloading the spent brass. Each shell clinked softly onto the bench. She didn't look at anyone, didn't react. She set the revolver down, grip facing Marty, and turned. 2 boxes of 9mm and a left eye patch. Please. Her voice was soft, calm, like she just finished reading a grocery list. She didn't wait for a response. Behind her, the target still hung, silent, undeniable. The man in the army cap shook his head, voice just a breath. Nobody does that. Not outside combat ranges. The boy with the phone finally lowered it. His thumb hovered over the delete button. He didn't press it. He didn't speak. Elena walked past them without a word. The door swung closed behind her, and the sound echoed louder than any of the gunshots had. For the next minute, nobody said anything. They just stared at the hole in the center of the paper. One single tear, and tried to understand what they'd just seen. It was 12:09 when the murmurs finally gave way to something louder. Derek, the off-duty security guard leaning near the exit, pushed forward. His uniform was too crisp for the heat, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights like it had something to prove. "I don't buy it," he said, stepping between Elena and the counter. "No way someone like her pulls that kind of grouping. That's not civilian training." He looked her up and down with deliberate pace. Frayed shirt, dusty jeans, worn sneakers. Then he crossed his arms. "What's your deal? Got a licensed military record? Ever shoot a sanctioned match? Or do you just get your kicks playing vet in a gun shop?" His voice carried. It wasn't yelling, but it pressed into the room, giving the others permission to question her again. Elena didn't respond. She was placing the Colt python back into its case. Her motions remained smooth, her fingers light on the metal. Trevor shifted near the holsters, his voice suddenly braver now that someone else had taken the lead. "Yeah. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? You train at some private range out in the woods." A few chuckled. The tension started to loosen, but only slightly. "By the display of rifle optics." An older man looked up, gray hair under a faded baseball cap. He hadn't spoken all morning. Now he stepped forward, slow and careful, hands tucked behind his back like he wasn't quite sure what he was about to say. "Firebase Echo," he said quietly. Everyone turned. That was fall of 2011, near the border. We were pinned for over 4 hours. Thought we were done. Then someone called in Cass from a low pass. "Pave hawks and a bird dog up high for overwatch." He squinted at Elena. "You were one of them. You dropped through the tree line with the medload strapped to your back. I remember the walk. I remember that face." Marty blinked. "You talking about Afghanistan?" The older man nodded, then looked back to Elena. "You didn't speak a word back then either. Just patched our guy, cleared the edge, and waved for the chopper. It was over in 10 minutes. We didn't even get a name. Someone near the front scoffed. That was 14 years ago. You sure the old man didn't look away? I've forgotten names, not faces, and not the way she moved with that sidearm, not with a draw that fast under pressure." Derek shook his head, frustration cutting through the moment. "That's just a story. There's no record of that. No proof." Elena turned her head slightly. Her voice was calm. "I'm here to buy what I need. Same as you." Her tone didn't rise. It didn't ask for understanding. It stated fact, like the weight of a round in a chamber. Derek stared for a moment longer, but she didn't blink. The badge on his chest felt smaller now. The old man stepped back. The room quieted again, and no one laughed. It was 12:14 when the bell above the front door rang again. Quieter than before, but cutting through the low murmur in the shop like a blade. 2 men stepped inside, both dressed in plain gray jackets and khaki trousers, regulation haircuts, black folders tucked beneath their arms. They didn't pause, didn't glance around. They walked straight toward Elena. The taller of the two stopped 3 feet from her and drew himself to attention. His voice was low but clear. "Ma'am, Captain Elena Harper." Elena looked up from the counter, eyes meeting his with no surprise. The man opened the folder and held out a single envelope. The flap was stamped with a government seal. No return address, no markings beyond the watermark. The kind used for operations too sensitive for regular channels. Recall activation. Department of the Air Force. You're being reactivated under Article 4. Tier 2 clearance. Effective immediately. He didn't blink. The words came out flat, without apology. Not cold. Just absolute. The other man, shorter, square jaw, stood a step behind. He saluted, hand sharp, elbow tucked tight. It wasn't casual. It was regulation. And when it dropped, he stepped back without a word. The shop fell still. Trevor's arm lowered from where he'd been leaning. Derek took a half step back. Marty didn't move. His mouth opened, then closed again. Elena took the envelope, peeled the flap open without rush, and scanned the contents in one glance. Her thumb traced the corner once before folding the letter and sliding it into her wallet. "Acknowledged," she said quietly. She turned to the counter and glanced toward the shelf behind Marty. Her voice was calm. "I'll need 2 boxes of 9mm ball and a left side occlusion patch." Marty didn't move. "Now, please." That got him going. He reached under the display and started pulling the requested ammo. He didn't speak. Behind them, the taller agent turned slightly. Posture still formal, but less rigid. Extraction team is inbound. Vehicle ETA in 4 minutes. Pickup zone 2 blocks east. Non-marked. No call signs. Orders are verbal. Secure channel confirms. Elena nodded once. She didn't ask questions. Didn't hesitate. She reached into her canvas wallet, pulled out a few folded bills, and placed them on the glass. Each movement was exact, like someone handling a sidearm under a blackout canopy. Deliberate. Controlled. As she zipped her wallet shut, the older man near the back removed his hat. No words. Just a small gesture of respect. The woman in the blazer took a step back. Claire didn't speak. Derek's badge gleamed under the fluorescent light, but he didn't meet her eyes again. Elena picked up the small box of rounds, tucked the eye patch into her shirt pocket, and nodded once toward the agents. Then she turned and walked toward the door. No salute, no speech, just a quiet exit. The suits followed close behind, their pace steady, no formation, just alignment. By the time the bell rang again as the door shut, no one was asking who she was. They knew. It was 12:20 when the door swung closed behind Elena, the bell giving a final, subdued chime. The 2 plainclothesmen followed her into the sunlight, their steps measured, their expressions unreadable. No one inside the shop moved. They just stood there, silent, as if the air had been sucked from the room. Marty stared at the door. His fingers hovered above the register keys. But he didn't ring the sale. Claire slowly slid her magazine back onto the shelf. The page she'd been holding had crumpled at the corner. She didn't bother fixing it. The cameras inside the store blinked once, then all cut to black. No warning, no beeping, just darkness. Marty blinked at the control screen, tapped it once. Nothing. Static replaced the live feed. At exactly 12:23, a maintenance override disabled every security channel tied to the building. No message followed. No explanation. Just silence. The only thing left was the target, still hanging inside the range, still clean, still centered. 5 holes, fused into one, like it had never been touched by human error. By 13:15, the first clip hit social media. Shaky, low-res footage of Elena walking into the range, Colt python in hand. A quick cut, a startled reaction, and that sound 5 rounds in tight sequence, too fast to track. No full footage of the grouping. Just enough to stir questions. Enough to stir awe. The comments exploded. Who is she? Is this staged? That looks like military training. By sundown, Trevor had tried to post a defense video laughing it off, calling it a setup, claiming she was probably a YouTuber or ex-law enforcement. His voice cracked halfway through. It only made things worse. The gym that had just signed him to a sponsorship deal pulled their support within 48 hours. Their statement read, "We align with courage and humility, not mockery." Derek didn't go online. He didn't get the chance. His supervisor called that evening. A clip had surfaced. His tone, his challenge, the way he confronted Elena, none of it looked good. He was asked to return his uniform and badge the next morning. The official reason cited behavior incompatible with company standards. Inside the shop, no one brought up her name after that day. Not directly. But customers would pause at the range door, looking at the still hanging target. Marty never took it down. He didn't speak of it, either. But he'd flinch a little whenever someone mentioned the 357 in passing. The old man with the army cap returned a week later. He stood at the corner stool with a black coffee and a notepad. His handwriting was tight, shaky. He wrote a 2-page letter to the local paper, recounting what he remembered from Firebase Echo. The night the medevac came too late. The woman who dropped from the trees. No one ever published it. But he folded the pages carefully, slid them into a plastic sleeve, and tucked it behind a photo of his grandkids in his wallet. Claire tried to spin the story to her book club, claimed she had sensed something from the start, that she had seen Elena's hands, and just knew. But the others didn't invite her back after that. One of them said quietly, "You don't get to rewrite your part just because it didn't look good." No one saw Elena again. Not in that town. Not online. Not in any public database. The plates on the SUV weren't traceable. The cameras on Main Street showed static for a full 15 minutes after she left. But stories didn't stop. Some said she was Black Ops. Others guessed Air Force Combat Rescue. One person claimed she was part of a downed recon crew that never made the reports. No one could confirm. No one could deny. And in the quiet of Ashwood Firearms, when the door opened and the bell rang again, people spoke softer. They didn't mock as quickly. They didn't assume as easily. Because now, there was a story in the walls. A woman with no name, no ID, just skill, precision, and silence. And 5 perfect rounds in the center of a target no one dared touch. It was 12:27 when Elena stepped into the back seat of the unmarked SUV. The door closed behind her with a muted thud. No one on the street saw her go. No one would remember the vehicle's plate or even agree on the make. It just disappeared into the heat shimmer of a Virginia afternoon. Inside Ashwood Firearms, no one spoke. Not for a long while. Eventually, Marty bent down and picked up the pen he'd dropped near the register. He stared at it for a second before setting it down and walking away from the counter. Someone whispered, "She's gone." But that wasn't entirely true, because Elena hadn't left empty-handed. And she hadn't left them empty either. Her last words before walking out had been quiet. Almost casual. Trevor, still trying to salvage some piece of himself, had shouted after her, "If you're so dangerous, why are you out here dressed like that? Why are you even free?" She paused, one hand on the door handle. She didn't turn, didn't raise her voice. "Do you know what freedom means?" The pause that followed was longer than the question needed. "I spent 12 years making sure people like you get to mock people like me in peace." That was it. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need to. And for everyone in that room, those words hit harder than any bullet ever could. Because Elena Harper wasn't just a marksman, or a vet, or a name buried under classified ink. She was something more difficult to explain. She was the person who walks past judgment, the one who doesn't need permission to exist. She was the quiet answer to every loud insult, for everyone who's ever been talked over, laughed at, underestimated. For everyone who's ever walked into a room and felt every eye assume the worst, she was them. She was proof that silence isn't weakness, that you don't need a spotlight to make your presence undeniable. She didn't slam doors. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw back the insults that had been hurled her way. She just stood steady. She showed up with worn shoes, a soft voice, and hands that didn't shake. And in doing so, she reminded them, reminded us all that real power doesn't posture. It holds. It waits. And when it moves with purpose. There's a target still hanging in the back of that gun shop. 5 holes. Dead center. No name on it. No plaque. But everyone who walks in lowers their voice when they pass it. Not because they're scared, because they remember. Because she was real. And because, somehow, she was all of us.